They told me my name wasn't on the guest list at my own parents' 50th wedding anniversary. The valet line glittered with black tuxedos and champagne gowns. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated out from the open ballroom doors. And there I was standing at the gate, the doorman blocking my way like I was a stranger. My parents didn't come over. They didn't wave me in. They just turned away, pretending I wasn't there. I didn't go home, because 30 seconds later, someone walked up and handed me a folded piece of paper that would change everything. My name's Lucas Grant. I'm 36, an architect in a small coastal town 2 hours north of here. My family, old money, old rules, and an unspoken hierarchy where I've never been anywhere near the top. My sister Grace, perfect hair, perfect smile, could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was the independent one, which was just their polite way of saying I didn't fit the mold. I stopped showing up to most family events years ago, not out of spite, just because I knew how they'd go. The subtle jabs about my career, the way conversations shifted when I walked into the room. The only person in that house who ever treated me the same, no matter what, was Howard the gardener. He'd been there since before I was born. I grew up kicking soccer balls across the lawn while he trimmed hedges, swapping stories while he watered roses. If anyone knew the real history of this family, it was him. I didn't even make it past the valet stand. A man in a black suit, one of the event staff, stepped in front of me with a tight smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but your name's not on the list." I thought it was a mistake. I pulled the invitation from my jacket pocket, the one that had arrived 2 weeks ago with gold-embossed lettering. He didn't even look at it. Over his shoulder, I could see the ballroom doors wide open, crystal chandeliers glowing, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. My parents stood near the head table, greeting guests like royalty. Grace was beside them in a floor-length emerald gown, glass of champagne in hand. I raised a hand to catch my mother's eye. She saw me. She looked straight at me, and then she turned away. My father followed her lead. Grace smirked over the rim of her glass. The staffer cleared his throat. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." So I did, and for a second I almost walked straight to my car. Almost. I slipped around the side of the house, the gravel path crunching under my shoes. Out here, the music from the ballroom was muted, just faint notes drifting through the winter air. That's when I saw him. Howard. Same old work boots, same khaki jacket with the elbows worn thin. He was trimming the rose bushes along the fence, even though the season had long since passed. He glanced up, eyes narrowing like he could read the whole story on my face. "Didn't see you go inside," he said quietly. "Wasn't invited," I answered. My voice was flat, but my chest still burned. Howard set down his shears, looked around to make sure no one was in earshot, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. When his hand came back out, he was holding a folded piece of paper, creased, smudged at the edges. "You need to see this, Lucas," he said, "before it's too late." I took it, the paper warm from his pocket, and felt a weight in it that had nothing to do with the ink. I unfolded it carefully, the way you would with something that looked like it might fall apart in your hands. It wasn't just paper, it was a bank document. The logo in the top corner was from a branch I knew well. My branch. My name was printed in bold, centered at the top of the page. Below it, a loan agreement for $250,000. A loan I had never taken. My eyes scanned down repayment terms, interest rates, collateral listed as property and assets in the name of Lucas Grant. And then I saw it, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The strokes were off, the spacing wrong. It was a forgery, but good enough to fool a banker who wasn't looking too hard. Howard's voice was low. "Heard them talking about it last month. They used your name to clear a debt. If this gets out, they're in trouble, big trouble." I looked up at him. "Why give this to me?" He shrugged, but his eyes were steady. Because it's yours whether you like it or not, and you deserve to know what they've been doing behind your back. I didn't wait until morning. That night I drove straight to a friend of mine, Mason, who worked in compliance at the bank listed on the document. His light was still on when I pulled up. We sat at his kitchen table, the loan agreement between us. Mason adjusted his glasses, scanning each line the way a surgeon studies an X-ray, before making the first cut. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Does it matter?" I said. He sighed. "It matters because this is real. The account exists. Funds were transferred 3 weeks ago to a holding company. Guess whose name is on the guarantee?" I didn't answer. "Yours," Mason continued. "And the holding company is tied to your sister's construction firm. If this is exposed, she could lose her license. And your parents, well, fraud isn't a great look for the family name." I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't just leverage, it was a loaded weapon, and they'd handed it to me without even knowing it. I didn't rush. In my family, rash moves got you crushed. Quiet preparation, that's what survived. Over the next week, I started building a file. I copied the loan agreement. Mason pulled transaction logs and the transfer trail. I printed archived emails tying Grace's company to the holding account. Every page had a date, a signature, a stamp, things that couldn't be waved away as a misunderstanding. I even had Howard write a sworn statement about what he'd overheard in the garden, names, dates, exact words. He didn't flinch. By Friday, the folder was thick enough to make a sound when I dropped it on my desk. This wasn't just evidence. It was the kind of proof that could undo reputations, sink careers, and force hands to sign whatever I put in front of them. All I needed now was the right room, the right audience, and the perfect moment to let it drop. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Sunday afternoon, my parents called a family business meeting in the dining room, the kind with crystal water pitchers, and everyone dressed like it was a photo shoot. Grace was at the head of the table, beaming about a new project she'd single-handedly secured. My father kept nodding like a man already counting the profit. I walked in mid-sentence, the folder under my arm. No one invited me to sit. I didn't ask. Without a word, I set the folder down in the center of the table. The thud cut through Grace's speech like a dropped glass. "What's this?" my mother asked. "Documentation," I said, "of a loan, a large one taken out in my name." Grace laughed too quickly. "Oh, come on, Lucas." With a forged signature, I cut in. "Tied directly to your company." The room went still. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's fingers curled against the tablecloth. Grace stopped smiling. And for the first time in years, no one interrupted me. Grace's chair scraped back. "You can't prove." I slid the top page toward her. The forged signature stared back like a mirror she didn't want to see. "I can," I said. "And so can the bank, the state licensing board, and the fraud division if I choose to send them this file." My father leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you want?" I let the question hang just long enough for it to itch. "The deed to the coastal house," I said finally, "signed over to me today. In exchange, this file stays between us." My mother's lips parted like she was about to protest, but one look at the document silenced her. Grace's eyes flicked between our parents, calculating, then dropped to the table. No one argued. My father reached for the intercom and called in the family attorney. 15 minutes later, my name was inked on the deed. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and stood. "Pleasure doing business," I said and walked out without looking back. I didn't hear from them for weeks. No phone calls, no messages, no sudden visits to talk things through. When we passed on the street, my mother found something fascinating in a shop window. My father kept walking, and Grace crossed to the other side. Word traveled, though. Her project quietly stalled. Investors pulled out. The whispers started, nothing public, but enough to make her circle smaller. Howard came by the coastal house one afternoon, a paper bag of fresh lemons in his hand. Figured you might have a use for these, he said. We sat on the porch, the ocean wind carrying the scent of salt and something sweeter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at the house as theirs. It was mine. You did right, Howard said simply. I nodded. Couldn't have done it without you. They thought my name was just something they could use, but in the end, it was my name on the deed, and theirs on the list of people who'd never set foot in this house again.